Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 17 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to these two positions, beginning with matchups, then transitioning into my top 16 rankings. If you guys are looking for my specific thoughts on an individual player, travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there. A quick reminder, any player who has already played over the course of Week 17 will not be included in today's video. Therefore, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, because they've already played this week, they will not be included. Keep that in mind. I wanted to go ahead and just present as many players as possible. So if you do play in a deep league or are in a bind based on injuries and or your circumstance, hopefully these players are available in order for you to pick up and help yourself capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and let's begin by talking about tight end matchups based on statistics that each individual defense has allowed over the course of week 6 through 16 based on receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. We find that the Bengals, Raiders, Buccaneers, Colts, Panthers, Jaguars, etc. are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. But unfortunately, some of these matchups we can't take advantage of. For example, we're not going to fire up a Denver Broncos tight end up against the Cincinnati Bengals. But on the other end of this entire spectrum, when we talk about the Detroit Lions being the most difficult matchup at the tight end position, we're still going to be firing up George Kittle. Don't get cute with the overall situation. Start your studs. Start the players that are going to get themselves an elite level of opportunity, because typically those are the guys that are going to be continuing to score a high volume of points. Either way, just wanted to go ahead and present these statistics. I will go ahead and go into further detail as I progress throughout today's video. Before I get into my top 16 tight end rankings, a quick reminder for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings this upcoming Sunday and for the remainder of the season, be sure to check out Underdog. There's a link down in the description. If you travel on over today, use code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10. Not only are you going to be able to claim the first time deposit offer, get those rankings, but also tail some entries going into this upcoming weekend. So if you guys are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. If you are not eligible, you can always find the rankings via Patreon. Link is down in the description. But the singular play that we're going with this weekend is Puka Nacua, Ladd McConkey, Chig Okonkwo, and Terry McLaurin all going higher on these specific statistics. Now, to give you some details as to why I feel so confident regarding this, Ladd McConkey has gone higher than 4.5 receptions in 5 of the last 5 games he has played. Marcus Jones, the primary nickel cornerback for the Patriots, is out this week. Puka Nacua has gone higher than 6.5 receptions in 7 of the last 8 full games he has played. The expectation is that he's going to continue to be the number 1 target as Cooper Kupp has disappeared over the course of the last couple weeks. Puka Nacua will continue to be a mainstay. Then we have Chig Okonkwo, who over the course of the last 2 weeks with Mason Rudolph has doubled up this number of 29.5 receiving yards. The expectation is that he'll continue to get himself a high volume of target share. We'll talk about Chig Okonkwo in just a moment. Then Terry McLaurin, the closeout. Again, 49.5 receiving yards is a very easily accomplished number. He's accomplished this in 11 of the last 13 games he has played. He takes on the Falcons, which are the second best matchup at the position. So if you want to go ahead and tail that entry, check out Underdog today. Use code Andrew. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and begin with the top tight end conversation with our number 1, Brock Bowers. Look, Brock Bowers is 13.4 fantasy points away in a half PPR scoring format from producing the greatest fantasy tight end rookie season of all time, beating what Sam LaPorta was able to produce last season. Not only is he on the cusp of that record, but he is also on the cusp of surpassing Puka Nacua's record for the most receptions by a wide receiver in a single season, with 105 this most recent year in 2023. Right now, Brock Bowers has 101 receptions on the season. The expectation is that he's going to continue to get himself a healthy volume of opportunity, as in the last 2 games with Aiden O'Connell as a starting quarterback, he has had 13 and 14 targets within this offense. Number 2, we have George Kittle, who continues to ball out. Again, like I've mentioned in the past, whenever we exclude crazy weather games for Brock Purdy, in all other circumstances, George Kittle continues to produce. He has produced over 12 fantasy points in a half PPR in the last 9 consecutive games if we exclude the crazy weather games against Buffalo and the Los Angeles Rams. This is a guaranteed negative game script taking on the Detroit Lions, and even though it is the most difficult matchup at the position, we are expecting a lot of upside for George Kittle, who's coming off of another impressive week of over 100 receiving yards. Moving on to our number 3, Trey McBride. Look, Trey McBride was pretty much nullified all of last week, even though he had an advantageous matchup against the Carolina Panthers. But luckily for many of us, he had himself a lackluster performance, and hopefully this week he's going to have himself a bounce back week in order to help us capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. Earlier this season against the LA Rams back in week 2, 6 targets, 6 catches, 67 yards, 15.7 fantasy points because he fell on a fumble in the end zone due to James Conner's fumble. But either way, when we go into this week's matchup against the LA Rams, recently the LA Rams have struggled against opposing tight ends. The New York Jets, this most recent week, 7 catches, 71 yards. The 49ers, 4 catches for 61 in that rain game. The New Orleans Saints combined for 12 receptions, 79 receiving yards. The expectation is that Trey McBride is going to have himself a huge bounce back performance here with a healthy target of opportunity. Moving on to our number 4 to close out the S tier, we have Jonnu Smith. Look, this most recent week of 9.2 fantasy points is his worst fantasy production since week 10. He's typically always implicated to score a touchdown, and considering we're still in a situation in which Jaylen Waddle is questionable to play, there's even more potential for opportunity for Jonnu Smith to get himself the targets he requires, and of course, the red zone utilization that he certainly does need over the course of the week. He's been a top tier option over the course of the last couple weeks here. I don't see the Browns matchup as one that we are avoiding with the potential of Jonnu Smith. We just have to hope that the running game for the Miami Dolphins isn't as prevalent as it was this most recent week, so that they continue to pass the ball in his direction. All right, let's move on to the A tier. Beginning with the thumbnail of today's episode, or one half of the thumbnail, we have Sam LaPorta, who takes on the San Francisco 49ers. Look, Sam LaPorta as of late has been incredible, and many of us are wondering why couldn't we get this Sam LaPorta to begin the season. From weeks 10 through 16 in the last 6 games in which he has played, he's averaging 11.07 fantasy points per game and 7 targets per game. Last time out against the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game, had 13 targets, 9 catches, 97 yards, 14.2 fantasy points. We're hoping for very similar production in a week in which, of course, the Detroit Lions should be putting up a pretty number against that defense. Moving on to our number 6, we have Chig Okonkwo. Look, Okonkwo has played incredibly well with Mason Rudolph in specific. In weeks 15 and 16, being able to produce 10 plus targets in both games, 8 plus catches, and over 59 receiving yards in both of these contests for 9.9 and 14.6 fantasy points in a half PPR. And in a full PPR, even more impactful of a player, because he's been able to garner a 32% target share over the course of the last 60 attempts from Mason Rudolph. The expectation is that he's going to continue to succeed, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are the 6th best matchup at the position, who most recently just allowed Brock Bowers to have 11 receptions for 99 receiving yards just in week 16. The expectation is that Chig Okonkwo should get himself a lot of upside within the upcoming performance. Moving on to our number 7, we have Tucker Kraft. Look, Tucker Kraft over the course of this entire season has been relevant. Oftentimes we are hoping that he falls into the end zone, but because there are so many mouths to feed within this offense of the Green Bay Packers, whether it be Jayden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Josh Jacobs, obviously a funnel for all the touchdowns that have gone in his direction as of late. You know, you have Christian Watson, whether he's healthy this week, we'll have to wait and see, but even in his absence, Dontavion Wicks scores. There are so many potential options that are going to find themselves success. It is difficult to potentially predict one of these players consistently being great, but in the case of Tucker Kraft, he has been great as of late. Over the course of 4 of the last 5 games, over 8 plus fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, taking on the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings have struggled against good tight ends as of late, or at least teams that want to consistently send the ball in the direction of their tight ends. Seattle this most recent week, 6 catches, 80 yards and a touchdown. Arizona a couple weeks back, 15 catches for 128. Many of tight ends have found success, and even earlier this season, back in week 4, Tucker Kraft, 9 targets, 6 catches, 53 and a touchdown against this defense in a shootout, which hopefully will be the case this week. Number 8, we have Hunter Henry. Look, the volume of opportunity he continues to get is enough to where we can trust him. But again, if he scores a touchdown, he's going to be an automatic top 5 player within the given week. In the absence of a touchdown, still going to be consistent with the reception count and receiving yards that he's able to accumulate. He's been able to get himself 8 plus targets in 4 of the last 5 games, and now has an opportunity of taking on his former team, the Los Angeles Chargers, tomorrow morning in a revenge game. We're hoping for consistent production and hopefully less utilization of Austin Hooper within the upcoming matchup. Moving on to our number 9, we have TJ Hockenson. Again, the ebbs and flows of TJ Hockenson's season have really clearly made him the number 3 and at times number 4 receiving option of this offense. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison are the priority. At times, we even see Aaron Jones getting more love within the receiving game. Nonetheless, TJ Hockenson has a great opportunity this week, taking on the Green Bay Packers, who are allowing 10.47 fantasy points per game and a half PPR to opposing tight ends since week 6. The most recent performances from tight ends against this defense: New Orleans 4 for 60, Detroit 5 for 54, Miami 12 for 126, San Francisco 6 for 82 and a touchdown, and Detroit once again for 6 for 71. Many of tight ends have found success. Hopefully TJ Hockenson can find himself with 5 catches and 60 receiving yards within the upcoming performance. Again, there are other tight ends within this offense that continue to chip away at his potential for upside, but hopefully he'll continue to get that love, especially down in the red zone. Moving on to our number 10, we have Jake Ferguson. In the absence of CeeDee Lamb, I truly do believe that Jake Ferguson is going to get himself more target opportunity. This most recent week, 9 targets, is the most targets that he has seen with Cooper Rush all season long. Obviously, since the absence of Dak Prescott, the overall upside of Jake Ferguson has certainly decreased over the last couple weeks. But again, CeeDee Lamb being absent opens up 10 plus targets of opportunity for receiving options. And in a game against the Philadelphia Eagles, in which, of course, Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert will be taking on some pretty good secondary members like Darius Slay, of course, there's going to be a situation in which hopefully Jake Ferguson will be called upon to make plays over the middle of this field and find themselves success. As of late, we have seen many of tight ends find success against the Philadelphia Eagles. Zach Ertz, 6 for 47 in a touchdown. Mark Andrews, 67 in a touchdown. Likely 38 in a touchdown. Tommy Tremble finding himself scoring a touchdown. And even Pat Freiermuth, 3 catches, 22 in a touchdown. Just to put it into context, the Philadelphia Eagles defense has allowed 5 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends since week 11. Hopefully, Jake Ferguson will be next on that list. Moving on to our number 11. We have Dalton Kincaid. Look, Dalton Kincaid back earlier this season in week 6 against the New York Jets, who he will be taking on this week, had 6 catches for 51. Unfortunately, Dawson Knox did score the receiving touchdown, but the tight end position certainly found success within that given matchup. As it currently stands, the Jets are in the middle of the pack, but they are allowing 10.41 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Brenton Strange a couple weeks back, 11 for 73. The Miami tight ends, 4 for 58 in a touchdown. Seattle, 4 for 50 in a touchdown. Arizona, 6 for 84. Many of tight ends has found success against the secondary. And considering Dalton Kincaid is playing about 60 to 70% of his overall snaps from the slot position, and Michael Carter II is going to be out this week, his absence certainly does present a lot of potential for opportunity for Dalton Kincaid to go ahead and dominate within the slot receiving role of this offense. Moving on to our number 12, we have Zach Ertz. Now, I understand his performance this most recent week was quite underwhelming, especially considering when we take into account that Jayden Daniels had 5 passing touchdowns, none of which went in the direction of Zach Ertz. But going into this week, Zach Ertz has a couple incentives within his contract that hopefully will give him a little bit extra love taking on the Atlanta Falcons. He is 5 receptions and 62 receiving yards away from about $500,000 of incentives. That's a huge swing, and hopefully he will be going to Jayden Daniels, and hopefully has bought him a nice Christmas present so that he can go ahead and give him the nudge and say, hey, I need a couple more receptions in my direction so we can have a nice payday. All right, moving on to our number 13, we have Tyler Conklin. Tyler Conklin, this most recent week, 7 targets, 5 catches, 59, 8.4 fantasy points was fantastic. And going into this week, the expectation for the Buffalo Bills defense is that Balin Spector, linebacker, Taylor Rapp, and DeMar Hamlin, both the starting safeties, are going to be absent due to injury in this game. So if the primary coverage linebackers and safeties that would be covering Tyler Conklin are not going to be available, expect for a lot of success from Tyler Conklin. Most recently, the Buffalo Bills have struggled in terms of stopping opposing tight ends. New England, 8 for 94 and a touchdown last week. The week before that, Detroit, 7 for 111. And before that, Kansas City, 7 for 42 and 2 touchdowns. The expectation is a lot of upside for Tyler Conklin this week as a sleeper hidden gem option. Moving on to our number 14, we have Brenton Strange. Look, Brenton Strange obviously had himself a huge drastic drop in terms of overall snaps and routes ran. If we look at the comparison of week 15 in comparison to week 16, in week 15, 82% of the snaps played, 43 routes ran. The week after, 51% of the snaps played, only 15 routes ran. Again, running a third of the overall routes was a reason why he went from 12 targets to 4 targets. It purely makes sense, but we didn't anticipate that to take place. Hopefully going into the matchup against the Tennessee Titans, he's going to find himself upside. Earlier this season when the Jaguars took on the Tennessee Titans back in week 14, Evan Ingram and Brenton Strange combined for 7 targets, 5 catches, 54. We're hoping for some very similar production within the given week. The final tight end I wanted to mention is Juwan Johnson. Look, the fact of the matter is they take on the Raiders. They are the second best matchup at the tight end position, allowing 14.31 fantasy points per game. Foster Moreau could very easily score the touchdown within the given week, but considering, again, we do have Rattler out there, we don't know exactly who the ball is going to go in the direction of. I'm just going to assume, considering Juwan Johnson has ran the most routes and is playing more snaps than Foster Moreau, that he may be the one to benefit from the receiving touchdown, if in fact it's going to take place within this offense this week. All right, with that all covered, let's transition into the quarterback conversation in regards to matchups from weeks 6 through 16. We find that the Buccaneers, Falcons, Browns, Jaguars, Bills, Cowboys, etc. are the most advantageous matchups since week 6 in terms of passing statistics allowed, passing yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. Therefore, we of course want to fire up someone like Bryce Young taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who just a couple weeks back had himself a lot of success against them. While on the other end of this overall spectrum, we have like Jared Goff taking on the San Francisco 49ers, who are technically the most difficult matchup at the position. But the fact of the matter is Jared Goff is playing out of his mind, even though both Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are pulling a lot of the MVP favor as of late. Truly, Jared Goff has been playing his best season to date. Really has been dominant as of late over the course of the last 3 weeks, and we're still continuing to fire him up. Don't get cute with it. Fire up your studs, as they are certainly going to lead you to the promised land. Okay, let's go ahead and begin with our top 16 quarterback rankings. Beginning with our number 1, of course, it is Josh Allen. Just to go over this really quickly, as long as Josh Allen is healthy, they need to win this week against the New York Jets. And the reason why they needed to do so, at this current moment in time, they are 1 game ahead of the Baltimore Ravens in terms of the win-loss record in order to ensure that they are the number 2 seed in the NFL playoffs and that they have a home field advantage when they take on the Baltimore Ravens in the NFL playoffs, because that is eventually going to take place. They need to win this week in order to have another game advantage, because in the head-to-head matchup against the Ravens earlier this season, they lost. So again, they're not going to be able to catch the Kansas City Chiefs, but they certainly need to win this week in order to ensure that they get home field advantage against the Baltimore Ravens when the time comes in the second round in the NFL playoffs. So I do anticipate this team to play their starters and, of course, blow out the New York Jets defense. Moving on to our number 2, the only other S-tier player, we have Jayden Daniels. Again, Jayden Daniels, since week 12, is the number 2 overall quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. Since then, averaging 30.28 fantasy points per game, coming off of a ridiculous performance of 5 passing touchdowns this most recent week. Again, he continues to dominate, whether it is on the ground, through the air. On the ground this most recent week, 81 rushing yards. Again, when we're talking about his rushing yard contributions, over the course of the last 4 games, he's put up 8.1, 6.6, 9.4, and 13.4 fantasy points just off of rushing statistics isolated. Again, he continues to dominate and now has an opportunity of doing so against the second best quarterback matchup, the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are allowing 17.18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks since week 6, and with Zacchaeus and Crowder beginning to get more of a rhythm within this offense in the absence of Noah Brown, of course, Jayden Daniels is going to continue to succeed and, of course, lead ourselves to a fantasy championship. All right, moving on to our number 3, we have Joe Burrow. Look, Joe Burrow, 7 consecutive games of 3 or more passing touchdowns. Tom Brady currently holds the record for all-time consecutive games of 3 or more passing touchdowns. He accomplished that in 2007 with 10 consecutive games. But in order to potentially break Peyton Manning's record of 8 consecutive games that was accomplished in 2004, Joe Burrow would need to put together another 3+ passing touchdown game, which, again, I truly do believe that he's capable of. These most recent solid quarterback performances against his defense, I mean, Jameis Winston, 497, 4 touchdowns. Justin Herbert, 284, and 2 passing touchdowns. Hopefully, the Broncos defense, who are going to get Riley Moss back, aren't going to be able to stop Joe Burrow, as this could be a potential shootout in the Saturday afternoon slate. Moving on to our number 4. We have Jared Goff, who takes on the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football. Look, Jared Goff has been incredibly consistent thus far this season. In 11 of the last 13 games, 2 or more passing touchdowns. In the last 3 consecutive games, 3 or more passing touchdowns. The implication is that this game is going to be the highest scoring game of the week, mainly because the Detroit Lions are the highest scoring offense in the National Football League, as they are averaging as a team 32+ points per game on average. So this week, we're anticipating that Jared Goff should continue his streak of success against the 49ers defense. Moving on to our number 5, we have Sam Darnold. Look, Sam Darnold, very consistent as well. Very similar to Jared Goff. This week takes on the Green Bay Packers, which again isn't a great matchup, but with the absence of Jair Alexander, it will be easier for Sam Darnold. Very similar to what it was back in week 4 against his defense. Against the Green Bay Packers, obviously he lit up that defense for 275 and 3 passing touchdowns for 21.5 fantasy points, was 20 of 28 passing with a 71% passing completion percentage, and very similar to Jared Goff, has been a 2+ passing touchdown guy over the course of this entire season. Again, in 11 of the last 15 games has scored 2 or more touchdowns. The expectation is that, very similar to which Goff has done against the Green Bay Packers lately and Tua Tagovailoa has done recently, 283 and 3 touchdowns, 365 and 2 touchdowns. The expectation is that Sam Darnold should succeed in this matchup. Moving on to Baker Mayfield at number 6. This team's backs are against the wall. They truly need to win this game in order to give themselves an opportunity and a chance to making the NFL playoffs, as they are competing with the Atlanta Falcons for the division championship of the NFC South. Now, going into this week, again, you take on the Carolina Panthers that over the course of the season have struggled defensively, but last time out against the Carolina Panthers, they truly did give Baker Mayfield many problems. Baker Mayfield turned over the ball 3 different times on the ground and through the air. So again, if we're going to be in a situation in which Baker Mayfield does not show up and isn't the normal Baker Mayfield who is lighting up defenses, we could have some troubles. But ultimately, the Panthers are still giving up 14.52 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks since week 6. Middle of the pack matchup. Baker Mayfield's coming off of a solid performance of 303 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, and always has the scrambling upside like he demonstrated last week with 42 rushing yards. Again, the baseline of production for fantasy purposes is going to be incredibly high. As to whether or not they win, that's certainly still up in the air. Moving on to our number 7, we have Brock Purdy. Look, I mentioned this in the past and I'll continue to mention it. The Lions defense are dealing with so many injuries that it truly is going to give Brock Purdy an opportunity to succeed this week. Ultimately, over the course of the last 7 games, when we exclude weather incursions in which we have the Buffalo Bills or the LA Rams game, Brock Purdy, without weather implications, 21.81 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown league, has scored 2 or more touchdowns in each of those 7 games. This is going to be a negative game script guaranteed. The expectation is that Brock Purdy throwing the ball for 40 plus times within the upcoming matchup because of the complications that they have found within the backfield and of course the great run stop defense of the Detroit Lions. The expectation is that Brock Purdy should easily be a top 7 option amongst the remaining quarterbacks going into this week. Moving on to our number 8, we have Kyler Murray. Look, the O-line has many of injuries, but if they can keep a clean pocket, Kyler Murray could be very impactful for fantasy purposes. Back in week 2 against the LA Rams defense, 17 of 21 passing, an 81% passing completion percentage, 266 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 59 rushing yards, and 28.5 fantasy points. Now, even if we're not going to be in a situation in which he lights up this defense, very similar to that level of production, and maybe the pocket is not completely clean, as long as he's scrambling for yards, I don't care. As long as the rushing upside is going to be implicated for the upcoming matchup, his upside for success for fantasy purposes is certainly going to be incredibly high within the upcoming matchup, especially with James Conner being iffy going into the matchup. There's always a possibility in which they ditch the running game and continue to throw it out with Kyler Murray. Moving on to our number 9, we have Bo Nix. Look, speaking of rushing upside, hopefully Bo Nix can actualize said rushing upside, but in the event in which he doesn't, at least as of late, he has been incredibly consistent in terms of scoring touchdowns. He has scored 2 or more total touchdowns in 8 of the last 11 games, and most recently, we have seen many of quarterbacks find success against the Bengals defense. Therefore, Bo Nix should do the same. Most recently, we have seen quarterbacks such as Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson, Cooper Rush, and Mason Rudolph. 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks that have played against his defense, the only one who did it was most recently DTR. But, 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks producing 2 or more passing touchdowns. My expectation is that Bo Nix should continue his streak of success against his Bengals defense. Moving on to our number 10, Justin Herbert. So we had a couple pieces of information that were revealed to the public earlier today, which are quite exciting for the Chargers offense. First and foremost, J.K. Dobbins expected to be active after missing 4 games due to the injured reserve stint. He is going to be active and the starting running back, which is very exciting. Also, Will Dissly will be returning. I think this ultimately just helps the offense as a whole to give more potential opportunities within the red zone for Justin Herbert. Now, again, there are going to be opportunities that are going to be handed off in the direction of J.K. Dobbins that could lead to a touchdown, but in the event in which it doesn't, Justin Herbert has been playing incredibly well through the air, 2+ passing touchdowns in the last 2 consecutive games, and of course, within the rushing category, has also shown his tendencies to find himself success on the ground this most recent week with 8 rushing attempts. If we're going to be in a situation in which, of course, this is a competitive game, Justin Herbert should find himself a lot of upside. Moving on to our number 11, we have Jordan Love. The only issue that I have with Jordan Love is that, quite frankly, the rushing touchdowns of this offense have truly become their identity. This most recent week, 3 rushing touchdowns from running backs. Of course, Josh Jacobs, on many occasions over the course of the last month of the season, has purely taken away all of the upside that Jordan Love typically in the past has found. But this week, they take on the Minnesota Vikings. This should potentially be a shootout. And in the case in which it is, Jordan Love will find even more upside. Earlier this season against the Minnesota Vikings, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but 389 passing yards, 28 plus fantasy points. If we're going to be in a shootout potential situation, of course, Jordan Love will be potentially higher than the number 11 overall spot. But considering the identity of this offense and their defense, ultimately, this should be a lower scoring contest in comparison to the last time out against the Minnesota Vikings, in which, of course, they got boat raced 20 plus points in the first half. And when you're down 28 plus points, of course, you're throwing for the entirety of the second half. Moving on to our number 12, we have both Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco, mainly because Anthony Richardson has popped up on the injury report, has not practiced with a back and foot injury. If we're going to be in a situation in which, again, Anthony Richardson is not healthy, again, the way that he plays football, he has a physical style of running. And if he's not going to be able to actualize that physical upside, they would rather just throw Joe Flacco into the conversation, who's played incredibly well in the absence of Anthony Richardson this season, and of course find success, because over the course of this season thus far, specifically in the last 5 games in which Anthony Richardson has played, he has scored 13, 10.6, 10.8, 6.1, and 15.2 fantasy points based on rushing statistics. So if he's not able to run the ball effectively, he's certainly not going to be able to pass the ball effectively, and they may be going with Joe Flacco this week in order to give themselves a chance to still make the playoffs. So we'll have to wait and see who is available. If Joe Flacco is available and going to be the starter, he'd be my number 12. Moving on to our number 13, we have Matthew Stafford. Look, his last 2 couple performances have been quite underwhelming. The offense as a whole, dealing with the rain situation against the 49ers, and this most recent week, obviously, weren't able to find much success as a passing attack against the Jets defense. Taking on the Arizona Cardinals will be a completely different conversation, considering the Arizona Cardinals haven't been able to stop anybody in the last couple weeks here. Whether it has been the Carolina or New England Patriots offense, quite frankly, haven't been able to stop anybody. We should see far more upside from Matthew Stafford. This most recent week, the entire game plan was to run the ball. This could once again be the game plan against the Arizona Cardinals, considering they can't stop the run either. But this most recent week, it's not like Matthew Stafford played badly. He was 14 of 19 passing, a 74% passing completion percentage. Sure, he turned over the ball once, but he could certainly find even more upside if, in fact, this Cardinals offense can continue to force them in that direction. Moving on to our number 14, we have Tua Tagovailoa. Depending on how the weather looks, if the weather is going to be solid and not going to be a heavy downpour, I would have Tua Tagovailoa ahead of Matthew Stafford, mainly because this matchup against the Browns is the third best at the quarterback position. If, in fact, Jaylen Waddle is active, it would give me even more credence to start Tua Tagovailoa within the upcoming matchup, who has played pretty well as of late. Again, purely dependent on those two factors. We'll keep an eye on it as we get closer to Sunday's games. Moving on to our number 15, we have Bryce Young. Look, Bryce Young in each of the last 8 games has had 1 touchdown minimum. In 3 of the last 4 games has had 2 or more touchdowns. In the last 4 games, his rushing upside has really been the difference maker for him, scoring an average 7.65 fantasy points per game on the ground, because he has scored 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 games and also had himself 126 rushing yards. The most recent week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 13 scored 23.62 fantasy points with 298 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, and 1 rushing touchdown. Considering the Buccaneers are the best matchup at the quarterback position, anticipate for Bryce Young to be an automatic pickup and play for those of you who are in need of a backup quarterback in the absence of Jalen Hurts. Moving on to our final quarterback, we have Drake Maye. Very similar to Bryce Young, has had 1 touchdown minimum in the last 10 games and has scored 2+ touchdowns in 5 of those games. Again, the rushing upside on average 4.79 fantasy points per game via the rushing statistic category. As long as he's going to continue to get himself a touchdown plus worth of points from the rushing category, it implies that he's going to continue to be relevant. Again, with his most recent week, he's getting himself utilization within designed runs at the quarterback position. The anticipation is success and, of course, a competitive matchup against his Los Angeles Chargers defense. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my rankings at the quarterback and tight end positions for week 17. Best of luck this weekend. Hopefully, you guys can bring in a championship. Again, in the next couple of days, we'll be live streaming later tonight at 7 p.m., Saturday morning, 8 a.m., and of course, Sunday morning, 7 a.m., all PST, answering questions in order to set you guys up for success. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace!